At my daughter's wedding, I was seated on a folding chair beside the restroom. My son-in-law walked past and said, "That's the seat for plus ones." I looked around. Every guest had a real seat. Even a stranger's dog had a chair. So I picked up my gift, turned around and said, "Then I guess the plus one is heading out." More than half the guests stood up and walked out with me. My daughter came running after me, calling my name. "Thank you for tuning in to Dad's Revenge Stories. I truly appreciate your support. Tell me below, what country or city are you joining from today? Please note, fictional elements are included for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons or places is coincidental, yet the underlying message is practical and meaningful. My name is George Bennett. I am 67 years old. I own a home repair shop in the San Gabriel Valley that has been open for 31 years. I have calluses on both hands, a bad left knee from a fall off a ladder in 2009, and a reputation in my neighborhood for showing up when people need me. At my daughter's wedding, my seat was a folding metal chair wedged against the wall beside the bathroom hallway. I want you to understand what that room looked like before I tell you what I did. The venue was called Magnolia Grand, a converted estate property in Pasadena that cost more per hour than most people earn in a week. The ceiling ran 30 feet overhead, strung with warm Edison bulbs that made everything below look like a movie. Long rectangular tables were draped in ivory linen, each one carrying crystal glasses, white floral centerpieces, and small cards, printed in gold script with the names of the people who belonged there. I walked in at 5:30 wearing my second best suit. My best suit was gone by then, but that is a story for later. I moved along the place card table near the entrance, reading names, the way I read invoices left to right, methodically looking for mine. I went through the A's and B's twice. I checked the back row of cards in case something had been misplaced. I asked a young woman with an earpiece and a clipboard, Jennifer, the venue coordinator, whether there had been a printing error. Jennifer's face did something complicated. She pressed her lips together, scrolled her tablet, and then looked up at me with the expression of someone who has been handed a problem they did not create and cannot fix. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "I am so sorry. There is overflow seating near the corridor." She walked me there herself, which told me she was decent. We passed table 1 where Emily's future in-laws sat centered like a portrait. We passed tables of Ryan's college friends, his sales colleagues, people I had never met, whose names were printed in gold. We passed a round table near the band, where a woman had set a small dog carrier on the chair beside her, the little animal curled up on a folded blanket like an honored guest. At the far end of the corridor beside the double doors that led to the restrooms stood a single folding metal chair. Someone had draped a white cloth over it. The cloth made it worse the way a paper napkin under a fast food burger makes it worse. I was still standing there when Ryan appeared. Ryan Cole moved through rooms the way he drove fast with the assumption that other things would get out of his way. He was 35 years old, tanned, wearing a suit that cost more than my first truck. He glanced at the chair, then at, and the corner of his mouth lifted in the way it did when he thought he was being reasonable. "That's the seat for plus ones, George," he said, and kept walking. I turned around slowly and looked at the room. Ryan's fraternity brothers had a table. His sales manager had a table. 3 people I recognized from Emily's office had a table. Diane Kowalski, my neighbor of 22 years, and my late wife Margaret's closest friend, was seated at a table near the window, not because she was close family, but because she had been added to a guest list at the last minute when numbers needed filling. The woman who brought her small dog had a table. The dog had a chair. The man who had written the check for this room did not. Something shifted in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and more final than anger. The kind of feeling you get when the last number in a column finally makes the sum come clear. I had been adding up this particular column for 4 years without letting myself see the total. The folding chair was the last number. I walked to the gift table near the entrance. My contribution sat in a flat white box, tied with a silver ribbon, the most valuable thing on that table by a distance, though nobody in that room knew it yet. I picked it up with both hands. Then I turned around. Tommy Gallagher was at a table 10 feet away, 69 years old. My oldest friend, a man who had flown in from Portland specifically for this day. He watched me pick up the box. He watched me look at the chair. His eyebrows rose slowly and he set down his water glass. "George," he said. "Then I guess the +1 is heading out," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam anything or make a speech. I simply started walking towards the main door's gift box in both hands, moving at the steady pace I use when I am carrying something fragile. I heard Tommy's chair scrape back first, then Pastor David Holt, 70 years old. The man who married Margaret and me in 1982 folded his dinner napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood without a word. Marcus Webb, who has worked beside me in that shop for 18 years, pushed back from his chair and buttoned his jacket. Diane stood up from the window table, leaned over to say something to the woman beside her, and followed. Carol, my younger sister, stood and looked at Emily across the room with an expression I had seen once before at our mother's funeral. The look of a woman watching something she cannot stop and has stopped trying to. The Kowalski cousins stood. Margaret's sister's family stood. 3 of the old-timers from the shop who had driven down from the valley stood. Tommy was the last one up. He tapped the shoulder of the man beside him, said something quiet, and walked toward the door. I did not count them. I learned later that 53 people left that room in the following 4 minutes. More than half the guest list. The Edison bulbs kept glowing over tables that were suddenly conspicuously full of empty chairs. I was almost to the parking lot when I heard heels on the marble floor behind me, fast, desperate heels, and then Emily's voice, high and cracking at the edges. "Dad. Dad, wait." I kept walking, but before I tell you what happened in that parking lot, you need to know who I was before any of this started. You need to know the man they handed a folding chair after he built the table. Because that part of the story is the part that makes everything else make sense. Let me tell you about the shop first, because the shop is where you understand me. Bennett Home Repair has occupied the same corner lot on Garfield Avenue in Monterey Park for 31 years. It is not a beautiful building. The sign out front is the original one I painted myself in 1993, the letters a little uneven on the right side, because I ran out of wall space and had to compress the last 2. The parking lot holds 6 cars if everyone cooperates. There is a bell on the door that I have replaced twice, same model both times, because Margaret said the sound of it was the sound of our life working the way it was supposed to. Margaret. I need to tell you about her before I tell you anything else. Margaret Ann Bennett, born Margaret Ann Russo, grew up in Alhambra, 3 miles from where we eventually built everything together. She was the kind of woman who remembered the name of every customer's dog, kept a calendar on the kitchen wall with every birthday in the county written in red ink, and made coffee strong enough to remove paint. We met at a hardware trade show in 1981. She was working her uncle's booth. I knocked over a display of cabinet hinges trying to get her attention, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down on a folding stool. We were married 11 months later. We had 38 years. She died on a Tuesday morning in March of 2020, 6 days after a diagnosis that the doctors called aggressive and we called impossible. I was holding her left hand. Her right hand was holding a photograph of Emily at age 7, gap-toothed, standing in the shop doorway in my work boots, grinning like she had just inherited the world. I drove home from the hospital alone. I sat in the driveway for 45 minutes. Then I went in, made coffee the wrong strength, because I had never paid attention to how she did it, and opened the shop the next morning at 7, because I did not know what else to do with my hands. That is the thing about men who work with their hands. The hands do not stop needing something to fix. Marcus Webb showed up at 7:15, the same time he has arrived every morning for 18 years. He is 52 years old, broad-shouldered, unhurried in the way of a man who has never needed to prove anything to anyone. He looked at me across the workbench, poured himself a coffee from the pot, took one sip, and said, "This is terrible." I told him I knew. He poured it out, made a fresh pot the right way, and we got to work. He never mentioned Margaret directly that morning. He did not need to. That is the particular fluency of men who have worked side by side long enough. Diane Kowalski came over that evening with a pot of bigos, a Polish stew her mother used to make enough to feed 8 people. Diane is 64 years old and has lived directly across the street from us for 22 years. She and Margaret used to drink wine on the porch on Friday evenings and argue about gardens. When I opened the door, Diane looked at my face, and her own face crumpled for just a second before she pulled it straight again. You are going to eat this," she said, "and you are not going to argue with me." I ate it. I did not argue. My sister Carol called from San Diego every evening for the first 3 months. Carol is 63, sharp-tongued in the way of people who love deeply, but cannot say it plainly, and she had the good sense never to ask me how I was doing. Instead, she would call and say, "Tell me something that happened today." And I would tell her about a customer's kitchen faucet or a subfloor job in Arcadia, and we would talk about nothing important for 20 minutes, which was exactly what I needed. I kept a ledger. I have always kept a ledger. My father kept one, his father before him. It is a habit from the years when every dollar had to be assigned a destination before it was spent. The current one was a green hardcover notebook I bought at a drugstore in 2018, and I used it the way I used the ones before, it recording expenses, jobs, completed materials purchased. Margaret's name appeared in the early pages from that year. Small things. Her birthday dinner. The medication copay that insurance did not cover. I kept writing after she was gone because stopping felt like a kind of erasure I was not ready for. Emily called on a Thursday evening in June, 4 months after the funeral. Her voice was different from the voice she had used in the weeks after her mother died, lighter, faster, carrying something new in it. "Dad," she said, "I want you to meet someone. I've been seeing a guy for about 2 months and I think it's getting serious. His name is Ryan. Can I bring him over Sunday?" I was sitting at my kitchen table with the ledger open in front of me. I closed it. "Sunday's fine," I said. "I'll make dinner." I remember being glad in the uncomplicated way of a man who has lost one person and is terrified of losing another. Emily was my remaining piece of Margaret in the world. She had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's laugh, and her mother's absolute certainty about everything, which could be maddening and was also in its way a form of grace. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted it badly enough that I did not ask the questions I should have asked. I did not say 2 months is not very long. I did not say tell me more about him first. I just closed the ledger, wrote Sunday dinner on the kitchen calendar in Margaret's red pen, and started planning a meal. I should have kept the ledger open. Ryan Cole pulled into my driveway that Sunday in a truck so clean it looked like it had never seen a freeway. Midnight blue chrome running boards, not a scratch on the bumper. I was standing at the kitchen window when he parked, and my first thought was purely mechanical. That truck is a 3-year lease on a salary that does not support a 3-year lease. I have been in the trades long enough to recognize the difference between a man who owns things and a man who performs owning things. The truck was a performance. He came through the front door with his hand already extended, grip firm, smile wide, the kind of smile that arrives before the eyes catch up to it. 35 years old, tanned, good jaw, the easy confidence of a man who has always found that his appearance does most of his work for him. "Mr. Bennet," he said, "I have heard so much about you. Emily talks about you constantly." "George," I said, "sit down. Dinner's almost ready." Emily was behind him, glowing in the way she used to glow when she was 9 years old and had just won a spelling bee. She grabbed my arm and squeezed it hard, her eyes saying, "Please, Dad, just this once, be easy." I squeezed back. I set the pot roast on the table and we sat down together for the first time as something that resembled a family. Ryan was charming at dinner. I will give him that without qualification. He asked about the shop with what sounded like genuine interest, laughed at the right moments, complimented the food twice. He had a story about a difficult customer at the dealership that was genuinely funny. Emily laughed at everything, leaning slightly toward him the way a plant leans toward a window. I watched his hands while he talked. They were soft. Not a judgment, plenty of good men have soft hands. But they were the hands of someone who had never fixed anything, and I noticed. Marcus noticed something different when I described Ryan the following Monday morning over coffee at the shop. Marcus listened the way he always listens, without interrupting, without changing his expression, turning a socket wrench slowly in his hands, the way other men fidget with pens. "Does he own that truck?" Marcus asked. "Leased," I said. Marcus nodded once and went back to work. 3 weeks later, when I mentioned that Ryan had quit his previous sales job and taken a new position that came with a signing bonus, Marcus said, without looking up from the carburetor he was cleaning, "That's the third time this year he's had good news that cost somebody else money." I told him he was being uncharitable. Marcus shrugged and kept working. Diane was less subtle. She caught me in my driveway in August and said flat out, "George, that young man visits you more when he needs something than when he doesn't. I have been watching your front door for 22 years. I know what a regular visitor looks like, and I know what a purposeful one looks like." "He's Emily's boyfriend," I said. "He's being polite." Diane looked at me the way Margaret used to look at me when I said something she considered willfully stupid. Then she went back inside without another word. By September, Emily called to tell me she and Ryan had found an apartment in Arcadia. "Bright," she said, "close to the freeway. Good neighborhood." Then a pause and a shift in her voice that I recognized from her teenage years, the slight drop in pitch that meant something was coming, that she did not want to say directly. "The first month and deposit came to $2,200, she said. "Ryan's signing bonus is tied up in processing, just for a few weeks." I told her I would transfer the money that afternoon. She said, "You are the best dad in the entire world," and meant it, and I believed her. And I wrote it in the ledger that evening: Emily, first month rent and deposit September 2020, $2,200. I told myself it was a one-time thing. In January of 2021, Ryan called me directly for the first time. Not Emily. Ryan. His voice on the phone was different from the dinner table version, lower, faster, the charm dialed back to something more businesslike. "George, I need to ask you something man to man," he said. "I've got a situation, an old debt from before Emily and me, something I'm not proud of, $8,400. If it doesn't get cleared in the next 10 days, it's going to affect my credit score, and that's going to affect our ability to get a better apartment next year. I'm not asking you to give it to me. I'm asking you to loan it." I asked him what the debt was from. He said it was a personal loan from a friend that had gotten complicated. His voice was steady and direct, and I remember thinking that he was telling the truth about the amount, even if he was not telling the whole truth about the source. I told him I would think about it overnight. I called Carol that evening. She listened to the whole thing and then said, "George Arthur Bennett, do not give that man $8,000. I transferred $8,400 to Ryan's account the next morning. In the ledger, I wrote Ryan personal debt January 2021 for my daughter. Not for him, for Emily. That was the distinction I made, and I believed it mattered. Marcus walked past my desk while I was updating the ledger, glanced at the open page without reading it, and said, "That man's debts have a way of becoming other people's problems." I told him to mind the carburetor. He went back to the carburetor. Over the next 11 pages of that ledger, I would record $31,000 leaving my account for my daughter's life. I told myself each entry was the last. The entry I never told anyone about was the one I wrote in the margin of the January page, so small I had to squint to read it later. It said Diane might be right. The ledger does not lie. That is the first thing my father taught me about keeping one. People lie. Numbers just sit there and wait for you to look at them honestly. I looked at mine on the night after the wedding spread across my kitchen table in the harsh overhead light, and what I saw was 11 pages of a man who had told himself a series of reasonable stories while something unreasonable was being built around him. Let me read you some of those pages now, because you need to hear what $31,000 looks like written down by hand in a green notebook on a kitchen table in Monterey Park. March 2021. Emily's car needed new brake pads and a rotor replacement. The mechanic she called quoted her $840. I told her to bring it to the shop. Marcus and I did it in 2 hours on a Saturday morning. I wrote Emily brake job, no charge. Ryan stood in the parking lot the entire time watching us work wearing clean shoes. He did not offer to hand Marcus a single tool. June 2021. Emily called on a Wednesday evening, voice tight the way it gets when she is embarrassed to ask something. They were short on rent again. Not the full amount, just $400. Ryan's commission check had been delayed, she said. I transferred $400 before we hung up and wrote it in the ledger. Then I sat for a moment looking at the page and realized I had written the same explanation twice now. Ryan's check was delayed. I closed the ledger and made dinner. September 2021. Emily's apartment needed a new water heater. The landlord was slow to respond. I drove over on a Saturday with a replacement unit in the truck bed and spent 4 hours in their utility closet sweating through my shirt while Ryan watched football in the living room. When I finished and came out to wash my hands, Ryan looked up from the couch and said, "You're a lifesaver, George, seriously." I told him it was no problem. In the ledger that night, I wrote Emily water heater install materials, $320, labor no charge. January 2022. Ryan came to the shop alone. No Emily. He sat in the customer chair across from my desk with his elbows on his knees and explained that he had an opportunity, a friend's investment, short-term guaranteed return, but the window was closing fast. He needed $6,000 for 30 days maximum. He would pay it back with interest. He said the word guaranteed 3 times in 4 sentences, and every time a man says guaranteed that many times in that short a space, the word is doing the opposite of what he intends. I told him I would think about it. Marcus was in the doorway. He had heard the whole thing. When Ryan left, Marcus walked to my desk, picked up his coffee mug and said, "That man's debts change shape every time he tells them." I transferred $5,000 to Ryan's account that evening and wrote it in the ledger as a loan. Ryan never mentioned it again. Neither did I. May 2022. This is the entry I come back to most. Emily called and asked if I could come over to fix a pipe under the kitchen sink that had been dripping for 2 weeks. I drove over on a Sunday morning with my toolbox. The pipe was a simple compression fitting that had loosened a 20-minute job. But while I was under the sink, Emily mentioned that the bedroom closet door had come off its track, and then Ryan called from the other room that the bathroom exhaust fan had been making a noise. I spent 4.5 hours in their apartment that day. I fixed the pipe, rehung the closet door, replaced the exhaust fan with a unit I had in the truck, touched up a patch of drywall near the front door that Ryan had put his fist through, though Emily said a picture frame had done it, and carried 3 heavy boxes of Ryan's unsold sports equipment from the living room into the storage unit downstairs. I was sweating through my second shirt of the day when I straightened up in the kitchen at 6 in the evening and said, "You two want to grab some dinner? My treat, anywhere you want to go." Emily was already moving toward the front door. She had her purse on her shoulder, her hair fresh, a light jacket over her arm. Ryan was behind her, keys in hand, dressed like a man going somewhere he had been looking forward to all day. "Actually, Dad," Emily said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we have friends coming over tonight. It's kind of a thing we planned. You should head home and rest. You've been working all day. We'll do dinner another time, I promise." She smiled when she said it. A small, practiced smile that did not reach the corners of her eyes. Then she held the door open, and I walked through it, carrying my empty toolbox, and I heard the lock click behind me while I was still on the landing. I sat in my truck in their parking lot for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to. Then I drove home, went to the kitchen table, opened the ledger and wrote, "Fixed pipe, closet, fan, drywall, moved boxes, Sunday, no charge." I did not write what I was thinking. A man keeps some things out of the ledger. What I was thinking was this: I am 66 years old. I drove 40 minutes each way on my day off. I spent 4.5 hours fixing other people's carelessness with my own hands, and I was not worth keeping around for dinner. I closed the ledger. I poured a glass of water. I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the street for a long time. The ledger entry below that one, written 3 days later, said, "Emily rent shortfall May 2022, $300. I paid it. Of course I paid it. I was her father. But something had shifted in my chest that Sunday evening in the parking lot, quiet as a hairline crack in a load-bearing wall. I did not have a word for it then. Later, sitting at that same kitchen table with a wedding's worth of paperwork spread in front of me, I would find the word without even looking for it. The word was enough. The wedding invitation arrived by mail on a Tuesday morning in July, slipped between a utility bill and a hardware catalog. Standard white envelope, my name and address printed on a label in a clean sans serif font. I set the other mail aside and opened it at my kitchen table with my coffee. The card inside was genuinely beautiful. Heavy cream stock gold lettering, a small floral illustration in the upper corner. It announced the marriage of Emily Grace Bennett and Ryan Thomas Cole on the 14th of September, 2023, at Magnolia Grand in Pasadena, California. Ceremony at 4 o'clock. Reception to follow. One name on the envelope: Mr. George Bennett. No and guest. No response card asking for my meal preference. I set it against the sugar bowl and looked at it while I finished my coffee. Tommy Gallagher called that evening. He had received his invitation the same day, flying in from Portland for the occasion, and mentioned that his envelope read, "Mr. Thomas Gallagher and guest." He got a response card with 3 meal options. I told him that was nice and changed the subject. I told myself it was an oversight. I was good at telling myself things by then. The engagement itself had been announced in February, and by March, the planning had moved into a rhythm that did not include me except as a funding source. Emily called with updates that were really requests. The venue deposit needed to be paid before the end of the month. The catering company required a signed contract with 50% down. The florist recommended by the venue charged a premium, but was worth it, she said. I wrote 4 checks over 6 weeks. The contracts all came to my shop by email because, as Emily explained, the vendors preferred to deal with the person whose name was on the payment. I signed them. I filed the copies. I wrote the total in the ledger on a fresh page with a new heading, Wedding Emily and Ryan 2023. $22,000 spread across 4 signatures, all of them mine. Ryan announced at a family dinner in April, his parents Emily and me around a table at a restaurant in Pasadena that he had chosen, and I had paid for that. He had decided to cover all the wedding costs himself from his commissions. He said it with his shoulders back and his chin up, the posture of a man making a declaration. His mother Sandra smiled and reached over to pat his hand. His father Frank nodded with the satisfied look of a man whose son had turned out exactly as planned. I was holding a bread roll. I put it down on my plate carefully and looked at Emily across the table. She was looking at her water glass. Her jaw was set in the particular way it gets when she has decided something and does not want to discuss it. I said nothing at that dinner. I drove home and wrote one line in the ledger under the wedding page, Ryan claims he paid. Signed contracts attached. The worst evening came in August. Emily had organized what she called an intimate dinner, 12 people at a wine bar in San Marino. Ryan's closest friends and their partners, a kind of pre-wedding celebration for the inner circle. I was invited, which surprised me. I arrived in my good slacks and a pressed shirt, found the table in the back room, and sat in the one remaining open chair at the far end, between a man I had never met and the wall. Ryan was holding court at the center of the table. He had the room's attention, the way he always did in groups, loud enough to project, smart enough to read who was laughing. I ordered a club soda, listened, and waited for the evening to become something I recognized. It became something else entirely. A man across the table, broad shoulders, hedge fund tan. The easy manner of someone who has never worried about a car payment. Asked Ryan how Emily's family felt about the wedding. Ryan leaned back in his chair, swirled his wine, and smiled the smile he used when he was about to perform. Her dad's a good guy, Ryan said. Does handyman stuff. You know, fixes things around the house, that kind of work. Salt of the earth type. He said salt of the earth the way people say it when they mean the opposite of sophisticated. The table smiled politely. Someone made a small sound of acknowledgement. Emily sat 3 seats to Ryan's left. She heard every word. She picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip, and the corners of her mouth curved upward in the practiced smile I had last seen in her apartment doorway. Agreement by performance. She did not look at me. I sat at the end of the table and felt something move through my chest that I did not have a name for yet. Not humiliation exactly. Something more structural than that. The feeling of a foundation being described as decorative. I finished my club soda. I shook hands with the people nearest me. I drove home on the freeway with the windows down and the radio off. The morning of the wedding, Emily found me near the entrance of Magnolia Grand before the guests arrived. She pulled me to a corner beside a pillar close enough that her voice would not carry and looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as managerial. "Shdada," she said. Ryan's friends are successful people, professionals. I just want today to go smooth, so maybe just stay close to your table, okay? Don't go introducing yourself around. You know how conversations can go sideways. I was 67 years old. I had run a business for 31 years. I had negotiated contracts, managed employees, built things with my hands that were still standing decades later. My daughter was instructing me not to speak to strangers at her wedding the way you instruct a child before a formal dinner. I looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes did not waver. She meant it completely. "I'll stay close to my table," I said. She touched my arm once quickly and walked away toward the bridal suite. I stood beside the pillar for a moment, then went to find my seat. We both know how that went. There are things you keep after a person dies that have no practical value and every other kind. Margaret's wedding jacket was one of those things. It was not a traditional bridal gown. Margaret was not a traditional woman. She wore a cream-colored silk jacket over a simple dress fitted at the waist, with small pearl buttons running from the collar to the hip. She had bought it at a boutique in Old Pasadena with her mother 6 weeks before our wedding, and she wore it once on the morning of October 3, 1982, in a small church on Huntington Drive, with 40 people in the pews and me at the altar trying to remember how to breathe. After the ceremony, she folded it herself, wrapped it in white tissue paper, and put it in a cedar box on the top shelf of our bedroom closet. She took it out exactly 3 times in 38 years. Once to show Emily when Emily was thin and going through a phase of wanting to try on everything her mother owned. Once in 2015 when we attended the wedding of our neighbor's daughter, and Margaret held it up in the mirror for a long moment before putting it back. And once a week before she died, when she asked me to bring the cedar box down from the shelf, and she sat in bed with it in her lap, not opening it, just resting her hands on the lid. After the funeral, I moved the box to my side of the closet. I did not examine my reasons for doing that. I just did it. Emily called on a Wednesday evening 8 days before the wedding. Her voice was warm and careful in the particular combination that meant she had been thinking about how to phrase something for longer than she was going to admit. "Dad," she said, "I want to do something really meaningful at the reception. A memory corner, photographs of family who aren't with us anymore. Some personal items, things that meant something to the people we've lost. I want to include something of Mom's. Something real, not just a photograph." My chest tightened the way it does when something sounds right, but feels wrong. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "Her wedding jacket," Emily said. "Just displayed on a small stand with a card next to it. Something like in loving memory of Margaret Bennett, who would have been so proud. I think it would mean everything to the guests who knew her. And to me." Her voice broke slightly on the last 2 words. Slightly, but genuinely, or what I took for genuine, which in the end amounts to the same mistake. I told her I would think about it overnight. I went to my bedroom, took the cedar box down from the shelf, and sat on the edge of the bed with it in my lap, the same way Margaret had in her last week. I opened it. The tissue paper had yellowed slightly at the folds. The jacket inside was exactly as I remembered: cream silk pearl buttons, the faint and fading suggestion of the perfume she wore that morning in 1982. Carol called while I was sitting there. My sister has an instinct for the moments when I am about to do something she considers foolish, developed over 63 years of watching me do them. "Emily called me too," Carol said before I could say anything. "She asked me what I thought about borrowing Margaret's jacket for the reception. She asked you. She wanted to know if I thought you'd agree. George, do not give her that jacket." I asked her why not. Carol made the sound she makes when she thinks a question does not deserve a serious answer. "Because it's Margaret's," she said. "Not Emily's, not the wedding's. It belongs in that box on your shelf, and you know it. The second it leaves your house, it becomes a prop." I told Carol she was being uncharitable. Carol told me she had been called that before and had always been right. We said goodnight. I sat with the jacket for another 20 minutes, running my thumb over one of the pearl buttons, the way you run your thumb over a worry stone. Then I called Emily back and told her yes. I drove it over myself the following Saturday, 2 days before the wedding, folded in fresh tissue paper inside the cedar box. Emily met me at the door of her apartment, took the box with both hands, and looked inside with an expression of such genuine tenderness that I felt ashamed of my hesitation. "Thank you, Dad," she said quietly. "This is going to be so beautiful. I promise I'll take care of it." She carried the box inside. I drove home. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived at Magnolia Grand, and moved through the decorated space looking for the memory corner Emily had described. I checked the foyer, the main hall, the corridor near the bridal suite. I asked Jennifer, the venue coordinator, who checked her setup sheet and shook her head. There was no memory corner on the event plan. There never had been. I found Emily near the bridal suite 40 minutes before the ceremony. She was having her hair finished and did not turn around when I came to the doorway. "The jacket," I said. "Where is it?" A pause. The hairdresser's hands kept moving. "There wasn't space for the display," Emily said to her reflection in the mirror. "It didn't fit the aesthetic. I handled it." "Where is the jacket, Emily?" She met my eyes in the mirror for exactly 1 second. "It's somewhere safe. I'll get it back to you after the honeymoon." I learned 3 weeks later from the woman who had cleaned their apartment while Emily and Ryan were in Sedona that the cedar box had been placed in a donation bag on the Friday before the wedding. The cleaning woman had seen it herself. She had not known what it was. Neither apparently had Emily. I drove home from Magnolia Grand that morning and sat in my truck in my own driveway. I put both hands flat on the steering wheel. The morning was warm and blue, the San Gabriel Mountains clear in the distance the way they only get after the Santa Ana winds have scoured the air clean. A beautiful day for a wedding. I went inside, put on my second-best suit, and drove back. Magnolia Grand looked better in the late afternoon light than it had any right to. The converted estate sat on 2 acres of manicured grounds in Pasadena, the main building draped in climbing roses that had been trained up the facade over what must have been decades. The parking valets were already moving cars when I pulled in at 4:30. Edison bulbs glowed warm through the tall windows of the reception hall. From the outside, it looked like everything a wedding was supposed to be. I had written the check that made it possible. $22,000 across 4 contracts, all signed. George Bennett, all filed in a folder in my shop's back office. I knew the cost of every rose on that facade, the hourly rate of the catering staff moving behind the windows, the exact deposit amount the florist had required before she would confirm the centerpieces. I knew this building the way a contractor knows a house he built for someone else to live in. I straightened my jacket, walked through the main entrance, and went looking for my name. The placed card table stood near the foyer, a long, narrow table draped in ivory linen with cards fanned out in careful alphabetical rows, each one printed in gold script on heavy cream stock. The same cream stock as the invitation. I recognized the paper I had paid for it. I started at the A's and worked methodically to the right. Aldrich, Baxter, Chen, Coleman. I went through the B's twice slowly in case something had been misplaced or set behind another card. I checked the edges of the table, the small basket of extras near the end. I asked a passing server whether there was a secondary table for overflow cards. She pointed me back to the main display with a polite smile. There was no George Bennett. I stood at that table while guests moved around me, plucking their names from the rows, with the easy confidence of people who expected to be there. A woman I recognized from Emily's office found her card on the first pass and drifted toward the hall, laughing at something her companion had said. Ryan's sales manager and his wife, a couple I had met exactly once, located their names without breaking stride and disappeared toward the bar. Near the window, a woman in a floral dress had set a small canvas carrier on the chair beside her. Inside the carrier, a miniature French bulldog was curled on a monogrammed blanket, its flat face resting on its paws with the contentment of an animal that has never once questioned its right to be comfortable. The dog had not been invited by name technically, but it had a chair. I found Jennifer near the corridor that led to the service rooms. She was 28 years old, efficient, carrying a tablet and a wireless earpiece that suggested she was managing 3 conversations at once. I had spoken with her 6 times over the preceding 8 months, always about logistics, always about money. She knew my name because my name was on every document that mattered. When I told her I could not find my place card, something moved behind her eyes that she controlled quickly and professionally. She scrolled her tablet with 2 fingers, the way people scroll when they already know what they are going to find and are buying time to decide how to present it. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "I am so sorry. There was a last-minute revision to the seating arrangement. There is overflow accommodation available near the East Corridor." She walked me there herself, which I appreciated. We moved through the reception hall past Table 1, where Ryan's parents were already seated with the posture of people accustomed to being at Table 1. Past the long center tables where Ryan's fraternity brothers were finding their seats, jackets off, voices already loud. Past a round table near the band setup where Diane Kowalski was seated with 2 women I recognized from the neighborhood. Her reading glasses pushed up on her head, frowning at her place card, as though it owed her an explanation. The East Corridor was not technically part of the reception hall. It was the transitional space between the main room and the restrooms, functional, adequately lit, smelling faintly of the industrial cleaner the venue used on its tile floors. At the far end of this corridor, against the wall beside the restroom doors, stood a single folding metal chair. Someone had draped a square of white linen over it, which achieved the effect of making it look exactly like what it was covered up. Jennifer said, "I am truly sorry, Mr. Bennett. I don't know how this happened." I believed her. She had not done this. I was still standing in the corridor when I heard Tommy Gallagher's voice behind me. Tommy had come from the main hall holding a glass of sparkling water, and when he saw me standing beside that chair, his face went through 4 expressions in about 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, anger, and then the careful stillness of a man deciding what to do with his anger. "George," he said, "what is this?" Before I could answer, Ryan appeared at the corridor entrance. He had a champagne flute in his right hand, and the unhurried manner of a man who owns the room, which in every sense that mattered, he did not. He looked at the chair. He looked at me. The corner of his mouth lifted in the small, dismissive way it always did when he thought he was being reasonable at someone else's expense. "That's the seat for +1s, George," he said. Tommy's hand tightened around his water glass hard enough that I heard the glass creak. I put one hand briefly on Tommy's arm, not restraining him, just acknowledging him, and looked around that corridor one final time. Ryan's fraternity brothers had a table. Emily's office colleagues had a table. Sandra and Frank Cole sat at table 1 with linen napkins and crystal stemware. The French bulldog had a cushioned chair beside its owner near the window. The man whose signature was on every contract in Jennifer's event folder had a folding chair next to a bathroom door. Tommy said quietly, to no one in particular, and everyone within earshot, "George Bennett paid for this room, every dollar of it, and they put him next to the bathroom." I heard the words settle into the corridor and move the way sound moves in a stone building, finding every surface. I turned and walked back toward the gift table near the foyer. My contribution sat in a flat white box with a silver ribbon, the most significant item on that table by a margin that would have made several guests rethink the evening entirely. I picked it up with both hands. I have thought about those 4 words more times than I can count since that September evening. Not because I rehearsed them. I did not rehearse them. They arrived the way the truest things arrive, without warning, from somewhere below the level of conscious thought, shaped by years of accumulated weight, rather than any single moment of decision. I turned around to face the room with the gift box in both hands, and I said, "Then I guess the +1 is heading out." I did not raise my voice. The Edison bulbs kept glowing. The band was doing a sound check near the far wall, a drummer tapping a slow rhythm that filled the silence after my words, like water filling a low place. Tommy Gallagher moved first. He set his sparkling water on the nearest table unhurried, the way he does everything with the deliberate calm of a man who decided long ago not to spend energy on urgency. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket, looked at me once with an expression I recognized from 40 years of friendship, and walked toward the main doors without a word. Tommy had flown from Portland for this wedding. He left before the appetizers. Pastor David Holt was at table 3 closest to the ceremony entrance. He was 70 years old, with white hair and the unhurried movements of a man who had stood at enough bedsides and altars to know which moments required stillness and which required action. He looked across the room at me, looked at the corridor where the folding chair waited, and then he folded his dinner napkin with 2 careful creases and placed it beside his water glass. He pushed his chair back, stood to his full height, and walked toward the door. He did not look at Ryan. He did not look at Emily. He looked at me and nodded once, the nod of a man honoring something he recognized. Marcus Webb was at a table near the back, with 3 other men from the shop, all of them uncomfortable in their good clothes the way working men always are. Jackets fitting across the shoulders but pulling slightly at the arms from years of physical labor. Marcus watched Tommy go, watched Pastor David go, and then he looked at me across the room. He gave me the same nod he gives when a job assessment is complete and the next step is clear. He stood pushed in his chair with one hand, and the 3 men from the shop stood with him without being asked, the way a crew moves when the foreman moves. Diane Kowalski was at a table near the window. She had seen the corridor. She had seen the folding chair when Jennifer walked me past her table, and I had watched her face go rigid and controlled the way it does when she is furious, and choosing not to show it publicly. When I picked up the gift box, she was already reaching for her purse. She leaned over to the woman beside her, said something in a voice too low to carry, and the 2 women stood together and walked toward the doors with the composed dignity of people who have made up their minds. Carol, my sister, was 3 tables from the entrance. She stood before I had taken my 3rd step, the way she always acts on decisions she has already made before the moment arrives. She did not look at Emily. She picked up her evening bag, tucked it under her arm, and walked out with her chin at the angle she maintains when she is right about something, and has been right about it for longer than anyone wanted to hear. Margaret's sister, Eleanor, and her husband had come down from Ventura for the wedding. Eleanor had been at our wedding in 1982, had held Emily as an infant, had sent birthday cards every year without fail. She stood slowly with the careful movements of a woman in her late 60s who has learned to be deliberate with her body, and her husband stood with her, and they walked toward the door together without looking back. The men from the neighborhood came next. 3 of them retired tradesmen who had worked alongside me at various points over 30 years. Men who understood without explanation what it meant to be the one who builds things while someone else takes the credit. They left their wine glasses half full and their napkins on their chairs. I was moving through the room toward the main doors, and I could feel the change in the air behind me, the way you feel a shift in pressure before weather comes. The band had stopped its sound check. The catering staff near the service entrance had gone still, watching. Ryan was standing near the head table, champagne flute in his hand, and his face was doing something I had not seen it do before the performance had slipped, the easy confidence draining out of it, leaving something less polished underneath. Emily was standing near the bridal suite entrance. She saw the room emptying. Her face went the particular white that comes not from shock, but from the arrival of a consequence you understood was possible, but chose not to believe in. Her hands came up and crossed over her chest, fingers gripping her own forearms. I counted 53 people later from the venue's revised head count. More than half the guest list. The Edison bulbs kept glowing over tables that were suddenly conspicuously set for people who were no longer there. The centerpieces I had paid for stood in the middle of empty linen. The crystal glasses caught the warm light, and threw small rainbows across vacant chairs. I pushed through the main doors into the evening air. The San Gabriel Mountains were turning purple in the last of the daylight. The sky above them, that particular shade of deep amber that only exists in Southern California in September, when the marine layer has pulled back and the air is clear and warm and smells faintly of jasmine from somewhere you cannot locate. Tommy fell into step beside me without a word. Pastor David was 2 paces behind. Marcus and the shop crew were crossing the parking lot from the far end, their jackets off now, carrying them over their arms, the way men carry jackets they never wanted to wear. I was almost to my truck when I heard the main doors open behind me, and heels on the stone path, fast, uneven, the sound of someone running in shoes that were not made for it. Then Emily's voice, high and fracturing at the edges. "Dad, Dad, please. Wait!" I kept walking. Behind her, I heard a second set of footsteps. Heavier, faster. And Ryan's voice, stripped now of every layer of performance, hard and flat, and coming toward me like a thing with no good intention behind it. The parking lot at Magnolia Grand was paved in pale concrete that had absorbed the September heat all day and was giving it back now in slow waves. The valets had retreated to their station near the entrance. The mountains to the north had gone from purple to the deep charcoal that precedes full dark. Somewhere behind me in the building, the band had started playing again, as though nothing had happened, as though a room half emptied of its guests was a normal condition for a Saturday evening in Pasadena. Ryan caught up to me 30 feet from my truck. He came around my left side moving fast and planted himself between me and the vehicle the way a man does when he wants to make a conversation unavoidable. He was still holding the champagne flute. His jacket had come open. The performance was entirely gone now. The smile, the easy shoulders, the salesman's careful management of every surface, all of it stripped back to reveal something underneath that was harder and less considered. "You need to turn around and go back inside," he said. His voice was low and tight, the kind of voice that is working hard to stay below a certain volume. "Right now. You are embarrassing Emily in front of everyone she knows." I looked at him the way I look at a load-bearing wall I have been asked to remove, measuring what is actually there versus what someone wants me to believe is there. "I'm going home, Ryan," I said. "Have a good evening." I moved to go around him. He stepped sideways, blocking me again, and his free hand came up and pressed flat against my chest. Not a push, a placement. The kind of physical statement that is technically not a shove, but is designed to communicate that a shove is available. "That box," he said, looking at the gift in my hands. "That stays here. That's ours." Emily had come to a stop 10 feet behind him, breathing hard, her dress gathered in both fists to keep the hem off the gravel. Her face was desperate in the way faces get when 2 catastrophes are happening simultaneously, and a person cannot decide which one to address first. "Ryan," she said, "just let him go." He did not let me go. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds. Ryan grabbed the gift box with both hands and pulled. I held on, not from stubbornness, but from the instinct of a man who has spent 30 years not letting go of things that belong to him. He pulled harder. The edge of the box caught my wrist at a bad angle, my left knee, the one I have favored since the ladder fall in 2009, buckled on the uneven gravel, and I went down. Not a stumble. Down. Both knees on the concrete, one hand catching the ground, the gift box skidding away toward the wheel well of a parked SUV. The jacket, my second best suit jacket, the one I had put on that morning, because my best was gone, came half off my shoulders when I fell tangled around my arms as I caught myself. Ryan grabbed the jacket by the collar to pull the box free from where it had caught on the fabric. The jacket tore at the shoulder seam. Then he dropped it. He dropped it on the parking lot gravel and stepped on it, not accidentally, not in the motion of retrieving something, He stepped on it deliberately, his full weight on the left lapel, and looked at me on the ground with an expression I will not forget for whatever years I have remaining. "Embarrassing old man," he said. "Don't you dare make me look bad. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because people assume it was humiliation or rage, and it was neither. It was something much quieter. It was the sensation of a final number completing a sum that I had been carrying in my head for 4 years, the last entry that makes the total clear and unambiguous and no longer possible to rationalize or reframe. I heard Emily make a sound behind Ryan. Not words. A sound. Then Marcus was beside me. He had covered the distance from the venue entrance at a pace that belied his usual deliberateness, and he crouched down on the gravel without hesitation and got his arm under mine. "Up you come," he said in exactly the tone he uses when a piece of equipment has gone down and needs to be assessed before anything else happens. Tommy was on my other side a half-second later. Between them, they got me upright. My left knee throbbed. My palm was scraped from catching the concrete. The jacket lay on the gravel with Ryan's shoe print pressed into the left lapel like a signature. 3 of the guests who had followed us out of the venue were now standing at the edge of the parking lot. One of them, a man I did not know, one of Ryan's own colleagues from the dealership, had his phone out, not pointed at me, pointed at Ryan. Carol pushed through to the front of the small group and looked at her brother with an expression of such concentrated fury that 2 people stepped back from her involuntarily. Someone near the back said, "Someone should call the police." In California, intentionally causing physical injury to a person over 65 years of age is treated as a serious criminal matter, elder battery, not a simple dispute. Several people present understood this. I could see it in how they held their phones. I shook my head. Once clearly so everyone could see it. "No," I said. "Nobody's calling anyone." Marcus looked at me. I looked back at him. He understood and straightened up. I reached down and picked up my jacket from the gravel. I shook it once to clear the loose stones. Ryan's shoe print stayed in the fabric. I folded the jacket over my left arm. Then I looked at Emily. She was standing behind Ryan with both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide and wet, the train of her dress trailing in the parking lot gravel. She was looking at me with an expression I could not immediately name. It took me a moment to identify it, because I had not seen it directed at me in a very long time. It was shame. I reached down and picked up the gift box from beside the SUV's wheel well. I turned it in my hands. The silver ribbon was still intact. Ryan took 1 step toward me. Marcus moved 1 step forward at the same time, and Ryan stopped. I looked at the box in my hands and thought about what was inside it. $60,000. A lifetime of careful saving. A check I had written 2 weeks ago at my kitchen table, thinking about a young couple's future with the uncomplicated generosity of a man who has not yet understood how completely he has been mistaken about the people he is being generous toward. I opened the box. The box was not deep. It held 1 item resting on a square of white velvet that Emily had suggested when I told her I wanted the presentation to feel significant. She had said, "Put it on something soft, Dad. It'll look beautiful." I had driven to a fabric store on Valley Boulevard and bought the velvet myself, cut it to size with Margaret's sewing scissors, and folded it into the box on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks before the wedding, while the television ran in the background, and I thought about what it meant to give a young couple the foundation of a life. The check was made out to Emily Grace Bennett and Ryan Thomas Cole in the amount of $60,000 drawn on my personal account at Pacific Western Bank. I had written it in my best handwriting, the careful block letters I use for official documents, because I wanted it to look like what it was, a serious thing offered seriously by a man who meant every dollar of it. Ryan saw it first. His eyes went to the number, the way eyes always go to numbers on checks. The amount first, then the name, then back to the amount, to confirm what the brain initially refused to accept. Something moved through his face. The anger that had been there 30 seconds ago did not disappear. It shifted, recalculated, became something with a different shape and a different objective. He reached for it. "That's ours," he said. The same 2 words he had used about the box. Ryan had a limited vocabulary when it came to other people's property. I held the check so that everyone in that parking lot could see it clearly. Tommy was on my left. Marcus was on my right. Carol was 3 feet behind me. The man with the phone, Ryan's colleague from the dealership, was still recording. I wanted the record to be clear. "This was written for a son-in-law and a daughter," I said. My voice was level. I had spent 31 years giving clients bad news about budgets and structural damage and the true cost of deferred maintenance, and I had learned that the steadier your voice, the more completely the words land. "I looked around this parking lot tonight, and I don't see either one of those people. I see a man who knocked a 67-year-old down on concrete and stepped on his jacket, and a woman who watched it happen and covered her mouth. Emily made a sound that was the beginning of my name and did not finish itself." I folded the check in half, along its existing crease, the way it had been folded when I placed it in the box, and put it in the inside breast pocket of the jacket that was now draped over my left arm with Ryan's shoe print on the lapel. In California, a check that has not been endorsed, not signed on the back by the recipient, not deposited or cashed, remains the legal property of the person who wrote it. I could void it the moment I got home, or I could drive to the bank first thing Monday morning and put a stop payment on it for $7.50. Either way, that $60,000 was going nowhere Ryan Cole had planned for it to go. I closed the empty box and set it on the hood of the nearest car. Ryan's jaw tightened. The calculation in his eyes had run its course and come up empty, the way calculations do when the variable they were counting on has been removed from the equation. He looked at Emily. Emily was looking at the ground, at the gravel between her shoes, at the train of her wedding dress that was now definitely ruined and would need to be cleaned before the photographs could be finished. "Emily," Ryan said. One word sharp as a tool. A summons. Emily looked up. Her eyes went from Ryan to me and back to Ryan, and in that 3-second transit, I watched my daughter make a decision. I had seen her make decisions her whole life, seen the precise moment her face settles when a choice has been finalized, and I recognized the settling when it happened. She walked to Ryan's side. I had expected it. Expecting something does not make it land differently. Tommy put his hand on my shoulder. Not patting, just placing. The way you place a hand on something to confirm it is still solid. "George," he said quietly, "let's get you home." Marcus had already moved to my truck and unlocked it. He had my spare key, had kept one for 15 years for shop emergencies. He opened the driver's door and stood beside it with the patience of a man who has learned that the most useful thing you can do in a bad moment is hold a door open and say nothing. Carol came to stand in front of me. She looked at my face for a moment, the way she has looked at my face since we were children, reading it the way only a sibling can, finding the things that do not show on the surface. "Frank would have done the same thing," she said. "Exactly the same." She meant our father. She said it quietly enough that only I heard it. I got into the truck. The seat was warm from the afternoon sun, that specific warmth that California leather holds long after the heat has passed, and I sat in it for a moment, with both hands on the wheel before I started the engine. In the side mirror, I could see Ryan saying something to Emily with his hands moving. Emily was not looking at him. She was looking at my truck. Tommy knocked on the passenger window. I unlocked the door. He climbed in, reached into his jacket pocket, and produced a paper bag from the taqueria on Colorado Boulevard that he had apparently stopped at on his way to the venue. "I got hungry on the way over," he said, as though this required explanation. "There are 2 burritos in here. You haven't eaten since this morning." I looked at him. He shrugged and held the bag out. I took a burrito. I drove out of the Magnolia Grand parking lot on a September evening with the mountains dark against the sky and $60,000 folded in my breast pocket, and my oldest friend eating a burrito in the passenger seat. And somewhere behind me, my daughter stood in her wedding dress in a parking lot watching my tail lights and beginning, I think, to understand the arithmetic of the evening. I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like jasmine and warm concrete, and the particular clarity that comes after something has finally been said that should have been said a long time ago. I got home at 8:47. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the stove when I came through the kitchen door, the way I have looked at that clock every evening for 31 years, the habit of a man who organizes his life around the reliable passage of measurable time. The house was the way it always is when I return to it alone. Quiet in the specific way that houses are quiet when they have been built around more people than currently occupy them. Margaret's African violets on the windowsill above the sink, which I water every Thursday because she did. The calendar on the wall with the current month showing still written in her red pen from the year before she got sick, the months after that in my own handwriting, trying and failing to replicate the particular roundness of her letters. I did not change out of my suit. I sat down at the kitchen table, reached into my inside breast pocket, and placed the folded check on the table in front of me. $60,000 on a 4-inch square of paper. I looked at it for a moment, then I got up and went to the back office where I keep the shop files, and I came back with everything. The wedding contracts first. 4 of them each clipped to its corresponding invoice, each bearing my signature on the vendor line. Venue $8,000 deposit. Catering $9,000 deposit. Florist $3,000 deposit. Photography $2,000 deposit. $22,000 my name on every page filed in a manila folder labeled Wedding Emily and Ryan 2023 in my handwriting. Then the bank statements. I pulled 6 months of them from the filing cabinet, the ones that showed the catering balance transfer, the florist final payment, the venue deposit clearing. I laid them out in chronological order on the table, the way I lay out evidence for a client who is disputing a contractor's invoice, everything visible, everything in sequence, nothing hidden. Then the green ledger. I set it in the center of everything and opened it to the first page of the section I had headed Wedding Emily and Ryan 2023. Then I turned back further to the beginning of what I had started thinking of, somewhere in the 3rd year, as the Emily account. 11 pages of entries in my handwriting, every one of them a variation on the same transaction money, leaving my account entering her life recorded without complaint or condition. I read through all 11 pages slowly, the way you read a document you wrote yourself and are now reading as a stranger would, looking for the thing you missed when you were inside it. What I found was not what I expected. I had expected to feel the sharp edge of it, the anger, the sense of being used, the accumulated weight of 4 years of one-sided generosity, finally pressing down all at once. That was not what arrived. What arrived was something much quieter and more bewildering. Reading those 11 pages, I felt something close to grief, not for the money. For the version of myself on those pages, the man who wrote fixed pipe no charge, and meant it purely, who wrote for my daughter after Ryan's name, and believed that distinction made the entry something other than what it was. That man had not been wrong to love his daughter. He had just been wrong about what the love was building toward. I made a pot of coffee at 10 o'clock and sat back down at the table. The check sat in the center of the documents, like a period at the end of a sentence. I picked up a pen and was about to write void across it when I stopped. I would take it to the bank in the morning. A stop payment was cleaner. $7.50, and the check became legally unenforceable regardless of what happened to the paper itself. I set the pen down. I picked up the ledger to close it, and the cover flexed in my hands. The way it always does. It is an old book. The spine slightly softened from years of opening and something shifted in the back section. I had used the rear pocket of the ledger for years as a catch-all for receipts and folded notes, the domestic equivalent of a junk drawer. I reached in to straighten whatever had shifted. My hand found an envelope. It was not a receipt. It was letter-sized white, slightly softened at the edges with age sealed. I pulled it out and held it under the kitchen light. On the front, in Margaret's handwriting, the careful, rounded letters I had been failing to replicate on the kitchen calendar for 3 years were 5 words. For George. When it gets heavy. I sat down slowly. The kitchen was very quiet. The African violets on the windowsill were dark shapes against the window glass. The clock above the stove read 11:14. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The flap was sealed with the kind of thoroughness that means someone pressed it down more than once, making sure. The paper had the particular softness of something that has been handled, picked up, and put down, picked up again, before being placed somewhere and left. She had written it before she went into the hospital. I knew this without needing to calculate it. Margaret was a woman who prepared things. She prepared for dinner parties 3 days in advance. She prepared for difficult conversations by writing out what she wanted to say and reading it back to herself. She had prepared for the possibility that I would need something she could not give me in person, and she had put it somewhere she knew I would eventually find it, in the place where I kept the things that mattered enough to record, but not enough to file. She had known about the ledger the way she knew about everything in that house completely, without making a point of it. I held the envelope up to the kitchen light, the way you hold an X-ray, not because I could see through it, but because it felt like the right gesture for something that was about to show me the interior of something I had been looking at from the outside for a long time. The clock moved to 11:15. I set my coffee down, slid my thumb under the corner of the flap, and opened my wife's letter. 1 page. Ruled paper, the kind that comes in the yellow legal pads, she kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists and phone messages. Her handwriting, the careful, rounded letters I had been trying to replicate on the kitchen calendar, filled about 2/3 of the page, and stopped with the same deliberateness with which she approached everything, not because she had run out of things to say, but because she had said exactly what she meant to say, and stopped there. I read it once quickly, the way you read something when your eyes are moving faster than your comprehension. Then I set it flat on the table and read it again, slowly, the way I read a contract. George, she had written at the top, without dear, without any salutation beyond my name, which was how she always began things she considered important. No preamble, straight to it. I know you are reading this because it got heavy. I know you because I know you, and I know that you waited as long as you possibly could before you opened this, because that is what you do with hard things. You carry them until carrying is no longer possible, and then you find a way to carry them a little longer. I have loved that about you for 38 years, and I have also wanted to take you by both shoulders and shake you until something loosened. Here is what I need you to hear. You fix things. It is the best thing about you. And it is also the thing that will hollow you out if you let it. Because not everything that looks broken is asking to be fixed, and not everyone who holds something out to you is offering it. Some people hold things out because they have learned that you will take the weight without being asked twice. Emily has my stubbornness and your hands. She knows how to build things, and she knows how to hold on. What she has not learned yet is that holding on to the wrong thing is not loyalty. It is just a refusal to let go. She will learn this. But George, she has to learn it from the weight of her own choices, not from the absence of yours. I am not telling you to stop loving her. I am telling you that love is not the same thing as being available. A door that never closes is not a welcome. It is just an opening that the wind comes through. You are going to want to keep paying for things. You are going to tell yourself it is temporary, that it is just this once, that she needs the help right now and will not always need it. I know this because I watched you tell yourself the same thing about the shop's worst accounts, receivable for 20 years, and you were wrong every time. And the clients who took the most from you were always the ones who respected you least, because people do not value what costs them nothing. Do not be the floor she walks on. Be the door she has to knock on. There is a difference. There is one more thing, and I need you to hear it plainly, because I will not be there to say it a second time. Whatever happens with Emily, whatever happens with the years ahead, I need you to know that the life we built in that house on Garfield Avenue was the best thing I was ever part of. Not because it was easy. It was not always easy. But because every hard thing in it was hard with you, and that is the only way hard things are survivable. Take care of the African violets. Water them on Thursdays. They are more resilient than, which I always thought was something they had in common with you. I love you. I have always loved you. Go fix something for yourself for once. Margaret. I read it a third time. Then I put both elbows on the table and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, and I sat like that for a while in my kitchen at 11:30 at night, with the contracts and the bank statements spread around me, and my wife's letter in the center of all of it. And something happened in my chest that I do not have precise language for. The closest I can come is this. It was the sensation of a thing that has been held at a particular angle for a very long time, being gently, irresistibly returned to level. My shoulders came down. I had not known they were raised. I sat up. I refilled my coffee. I looked around the kitchen, the African violets on the windowsill, the calendar with her handwriting in the early months, the clock above the stove reading 11:32, the check sitting on the table waiting for Monday morning, and a $7 stop payment at Pacific Western Bank. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder on the desktop and named it Bennett Closing the Books. Inside it, I created a document and began a numbered list, the way I would begin a project assessment for a client whose property had been neglected and needed a full accounting before any work could begin. Item 1. The check. Stop payment Monday morning, done. Item 2. The remaining wedding balances. The catering company was owed a final payment. The photographer had a balance due. These were addressed to Emily and Ryan, not to me, and I had made no written commitment to pay them. An email in the morning, short and civil, confirming I would not be covering them. Item 3. The ongoing support. Every automatic transfer, every informal arrangement, every understanding that had accumulated over 4 years without being named or agreed to in writing. These needed to end, and they needed to end with enough notice to be decent, without being enough time to be negotiated around. Item 4. The seating chart. I stopped at item 4 and looked at it for a moment. Jennifer had walked me to that folding chair with the expression of someone executing an instruction she had not given herself. The original seating arrangements had been handled months ago, and I had been on the guest list. I had seen the preliminary chart in February when Emily had shown me the table layout over the phone. Something had changed between February and Saturday evening, and the change had not been an oversight. I added to item 4 request revision history from venue coordinator. I looked at the list for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, folded Margaret's letter carefully along its original creases, and placed it on top of the green ledger. The two things sat together on the kitchen table, the arithmetic and the love, and for the first time all evening, they seemed to be saying the same thing. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. I slept 7 hours without interruption, the deepest sleep I had managed since the week before the wedding, when the weight of everything pending had sat on my chest like a structural load I had not properly distributed. Monday morning, I went to work. Not to the shop. To my own life, the same way I would approach a house that had been let go for 4 years and needed a full assessment before anything could be repaired. The first stop was the bank. Pacific Western Bank opens at 9 on Monday mornings. I was in the parking lot at 8:53, engine off, going through the folder on my passenger seat the way I go through a project file before a client meeting, one final read to make sure everything I need is in order and nothing I do not need has come along for the ride. The teller who helped me was a young woman named Rosa, 20-something, efficient with the careful professionalism of someone who is good at her job and knows it without needing to announce it. I told her I needed to place a stop payment on a check. She pulled up my account, verified my identity, and asked for the check number and amount. Check number 417, I said. $60,000. Rosa's expression did not change, which I respected. In her line of work, $60,000 is a number like any other number. She typed for a moment. The stop payment fee is $7.50, she said. It will take effect immediately and remain in place for 6 months, at which point it can be renewed. The check will be unenforceable at any bank or financial institution for the duration. She looked up. Would you like to proceed? Yes, I said. She processed it. I signed the form. She handed me a receipt and wished me a good morning with the same pleasant professionalism she would have used if I had deposited a paycheck or ordered replacement checks. I folded the receipt and put it in the folder beside the voided check notation I had written in the ledger the night before. $7.50 to close a $60,000 door. I have always found it remarkable what certain things actually cost when you get to the counter. I drove to the shop. Marcus was already there the way he always is, his truck parked in its usual spot, and the front door unlocked and the coffee made. I poured a cup and sat at my desk in the back office, opened my laptop, and began working through the list I had made at midnight. Item 2 was the email to Emily and Ryan. I had drafted it the night before and read it 4 times before I decided it was exactly what it needed to be, which was short, civil, and unambiguous. It said that I would not be covering the remaining balances owed to the catering company or the photography studio, that I wished them well in their marriage, and that I was available by phone if there were any questions about the vendor contracts I had signed, copies of which I had retained. I attached nothing. I added nothing. I sent it at 9:22 from my work email address because I wanted there to be no ambiguity about the professional nature of the communication. I sat for a moment after I hit send, waiting to feel something complicated about it. What I felt was the particular quiet that follows a long calculation when the final number has been entered and the total confirmed. Item 3 took longer, not because it was complicated, but because it required care. The support I had been providing to Emily over 4 years had never been formally arranged. No standing transfer agreements. No written commitments, just the accumulated understanding of a man who showed up when called and paid what was needed. Ending it required the same informality it had begun with, but applied deliberately. I printed a single page on shop letterhead, not because it needed to be official, but because I wanted it to be clear that I had thought about it carefully, rather than written it in anger. It said that effective in 60 days, the financial support I had been providing including any informal transfers or payments made on Emily's behalf, would end. I listed the service providers she would need to contact to establish payment in her own name: utilities, renter's insurance, the phone plan I had been carrying on my family account since she was 19 years old. I organized them alphabetically with account numbers where I had them, because I could not help myself. 60 days was enough time to arrange a life. It was not enough time to arrange a story, which was the only thing I was fairly confident she would actually work on. I sealed the letter and set it aside to mail on my lunch break. Item 4 was the seating chart. I opened a new email to Jennifer at Magnolia Grand. I had her contact information in my wedding folder. We had exchanged emails 41 times over the preceding 8 months. All of them cordial, all of them about logistics and payments and coordination. I wrote to her now in the same register I had always used, with her professional specific without accusation. I noted that, as the signatory on 4 of the vendor contracts associated with the September 14th event, I was requesting a copy of the final seating chart and any earlier versions, along with the revision history, showing when changes had been made and by whom. I explained that I needed this for my personal records. I thanked her for her assistance throughout the planning process and noted that none of my concerns related to the quality of her work. I read it twice, made one small edit to the second paragraph, and sent it. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the back office with a wrench in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, which is as close as he ever comes to a dramatic entrance. "Phone's been going off," he said, nodding toward my cell on the desk. The screen showed 4 missed calls, 2 from Emily, 1 from a number I recognized as Ryan's, 1 from Carol. I picked up the phone and called Carol back first. "Well," she said, which is how Carol begins sentences when she has been waiting to say something and has had time to organize it fully. "Well," I agreed. "Emily called me this morning," Carol said. "She wanted to know if I would talk to you. I told her I would relay messages, but I was not going to advocate for a position I did not hold." A pause. She did not enjoy hearing that. "I imagine not," I said. "Ryan called her parents last night," Carol continued. "Tried to get Frank and Sandra on his side before they could form their own opinions. Frank called me this morning separately to ask what actually happened at that wedding. I told him to watch the video. I had not known about a video. I knew someone had been recording in the parking lot. I had seen the phone, but I had not thought about where the recording had gone." "There is a video," I said. "There are 3, Carol said. "Different angles. They are not flattering to Ryan." I looked out the back office window at the shop floor, where Marcus had returned to whatever he had been working on before the coffee detour, moving with the unhurried competence of a man who finds the physical world more reliable than the social one. "Carol," I said, "I sent an email this morning." "I know," she said. "Emily called me right after she got it." And a short pause. "She cried," Carol said. "The real kind, not the performance kind. I think she is beginning to understand that you mean it." I thanked my sister and ended the call. I set my phone face down on the desk. Jennifer's reply arrived at 11:47 while I was eating a sandwich at my desk and going through the afternoon schedule. It was thorough, apologetic in tone, without being defensive in substance, and it contained 2 attachments, the original seating chart and the final version, and 1 additional document I had not specifically requested, but which Jennifer had apparently decided to include. The venue's digital changelog. I opened the attachments in order, saving the log for last. The original chart first. I scrolled to the Bennett entry. Table 1. George Bennett. Seat 3. Between Pastor David Holt and Carol Bennett, 2 seats from the head of the table. I had been at table 1. I opened the final chart. scrolled to Bennett. The name was not there. I opened the changelog and read to the bottom, where the final entry sat in the venue's standard formatting date, and time-stamped, attributed by the system to the email address from which the request had been submitted. Final revision. September 8th, 4:47 in the afternoon. Requested by emily.bennett.bride@gmail.com. I read the line 3 times. Then I set my sandwich down, pushed back from the desk, and looked at the wall of the back office for a long moment, at the framed contractor's license, the photograph of the shop on opening day in 1993, the small calendar from the hardware supplier with the current month showing. It was not Ryan who had moved me to the corridor beside the bathroom. It was my daughter. Before I reveal the devastating truth behind that seating change, if you are still riding with me on Dad's revenge stories, comment the word loyalty below, so I know you're right here with me. Also, please note, the following part includes fictionalized elements for dramatic effect and may not reflect actual events. If this isn't the content you're looking for, feel free to stop the video right here. I sat with that information, the way you sit with a structural assessment, that confirms the damage is worse than you prepared yourself to find. Not better than expected, not within the range of what could be rationalized or explained as something other than what it plainly was. Worse. The kind of finding that does not leave room for alternative interpretations, because the evidence is time-stamped, and the timestamp does not negotiate. September 8th, 4:47 in the afternoon. 6 days before the wedding. Emily had sat down somewhere, her apartment, her office, her car, in a parking lot, and composed an email to Jennifer at Magnolia Grand. She had written in whatever words she had chosen that her father's seat should be removed from table 1 and relocated. She had sent it from her own email address, the one she had used for every piece of wedding correspondence for 8 months. And Jennifer, who had no reason to question a request from the bride about her own wedding's seating arrangement, had made the change. The original chart had placed me at table 1, seat 3, between Pastor David and Carol. I had been 2 seats from the head of the table. I had been in the language of seating arrangements family. Emily had moved me to a folding chair beside a bathroom door 6 days before her wedding and said nothing about it. She had stood in her dress at the venue and told me the seat was for +1s, with a lightness in her voice that I now understood was not carelessness, but performance. The same performance I had watched her and Ryan rehearse together across the preceding months. She had prepared the line. She had prepared the chair. She had prepared the explanation. What she had not prepared for was Jennifer keeping a changelog. I closed my laptop and looked at the wall of the back office for a long time. The framed contractor's license, the opening day photograph, the hardware supplier calendar. Ordinary things that had been on that wall for years and had not changed, and were not going to change, which was more comfort than it should have been, and exactly as much as I needed. Then I picked up my phone and called Carol. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting my call, which meant she already knew something, which with Carol usually means she knows everything and is waiting to be asked. The revision log, I said. Emily sent the email herself, September 8th, 4:47 p.m. A silence on the line. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a person receiving confirmation of something they had already suspected and had been hoping they were wrong about. I know, Carol said quietly. You know. Jennifer called me this morning, Carol said. She wanted to make sure I had received the documents she sent you. She was worried. She said she felt responsible even though she had just been following instructions, and I told her she was not responsible. And then she told me what the log showed. A pause. I did not want to be the one to tell you, George. I wanted you to read it yourself. I thanked her. I meant it. She moved her own father's chair, Carol said, and the way she said it quietly without emphasis. The way you state something that is so straightforwardly wrong that adding emotion to it would somehow diminish it landed with more weight than if she had said it at full volume. "Yes," I said. She did. After I ended the call with Carol, I sat for another few minutes. Marcus came to the doorway, once looked at me, and went back to work without asking anything. That is the thing about a man who has worked beside you for 18 years. He can read the difference between a problem that needs another person and a problem that needs to be sat with alone, and he responds accordingly. I had one more call to make. Sandra Cole answered on the third ring. She had a careful voice. Sandra measured, educated the voice of a woman who had learned to think before she spoke, and had been doing it so long it was now simply how she was. We had met twice at family dinners, both times in contexts where Ryan had been performing his version of the successful son, and Sandra had been watching him with the particular mixture of pride and mild uncertainty that parents wear when a child is doing well by the numbers, but something in the texture of it does not quite settle. Undercooking. I said, "This is George Bennett. I want to be straightforward with you about something, and I want to do it now before the information gets to you through other channels." A pause. "All right," she said. "I hold the 4 vendor contracts for the wedding house," I said. "The venue, the catering, the florist, the photography. All 4 signed by me. The deposits, $22,000, came from my personal account. I have the bank statements and the signed contracts. I can send you copies today if that would help you." The silence that followed was long enough that I checked my phone screen to confirm the call was still connected. When Sandra spoke, her voice had changed. The careful measurement was still there, but underneath it, something had shifted, the way a foundation shifts when the load above it is recalculated. "Then what did Ryan pay for?" she said. It was not quite a question. It was the sound of a woman running a number that was not coming out the way she had been told it would. "The rehearsal dinner," I said. "As far as I can determine." Another silence. "And George," she said carefully. "Ryan told us he had covered the entire wedding. He told his father and me that he had done it himself from his commissions because he wanted to start the marriage as a provider. Frank was very proud of him for that." "I understand," I said. "Thought there are videos," Sandra said. The shift in her voice was complete now. Whatever warmth had been in it at the beginning of the call had been replaced by something cooler and more deliberate. "From the parking lot Saturday evening. Frank showed them to me last night. I did not sleep well. I told her I was sorry she had seen them. I meant that too." "Is it true," Sandra said, "that Ryan was involved in the seating arrangement, that he had you placed in that corridor deliberately?" I thought about the changelog. Emily.Bennett.bride@gmail.com. 4:47 in the afternoon. "The seating change was requested by Emily," I said. "Not Ryan. I want to be accurate about that." A long pause. When Sandra spoke again, her voice was very quiet and very precise. "I see," she said. "We ended the call politely, the way 2 people end a call when they have exchanged information that is going to require a significant amount of time to process, and neither of them has any more words that are adequate to the moment." I set the phone down on my desk. Marcus appeared in the doorway again. This time he was carrying 2 coffees, and his expression said that he had decided the problem had been sat with long enough and now required the company of another person. He set 1 cup in front of me and leaned against the door frame. "Bad," he said. "Yes," I said. He nodded. He drank his coffee. I drank mine. Outside, through the shop's front windows, The afternoon light was moving across the lot in the long gold slant of a California September afternoon, warm and unhurried and indifferent to everything that had happened in the preceding 72 hours, the way light always is. "She moved her own father's chair," I said. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. Then he looked at me. "Yeah," he said. "I figured it was something like that." By Wednesday morning, 3 days after the wedding, the videos had done what videos do in the age of group texts and neighborhood apps. They had moved. I did not track their movement myself. I did not need to. Diane Kowalski appeared at my shop at 8:15 Wednesday morning with 2 coffees from the place on Garfield that she knows I like, and the particular expression she wears when she has information she considers important enough to deliver in person rather than by phone. She sat down across from my desk, set the coffees between us, and folded her hands on the edge of the desk, the way she does when she is organizing what she wants to say before she says it. "You should know what is happening out there," she said. "Tell me," I said. She told me. The primary video, the one taken by Ryan's colleague from the dealership, who had apparently decided before the evening was over that his loyalty to Ryan did not extend to covering up what he had witnessed, was 43 seconds long and showed with the unambiguous clarity of a well-lit parking lot at dusk. Ryan grabbing the gift box, George going down on the concrete, and Ryan's foot coming down deliberately on the jacket. The audio was clear enough to capture Ryan's voice saying the words he had said. 43 seconds was more than enough. By Tuesday evening, the video had reached every member of Ryan's immediate family through 3 separate channels. A cousin who had been at the wedding, a friend of Sandra's who had received it from someone at the venue, and Ryan's own sister who had gotten it from her husband's work colleague and sent it to Sandra with a message that Diane summarized for me as not supportive of Ryan. Sandra had watched it with Frank on Tuesday night. "Frank Cole called your neighbor Ted this morning," Diane said. "Ted called me. Frank is—" She paused, selecting her word carefully. "Devastated." His word. He said he did not raise his son to put his hands on an elderly man. I told Diane I was not sure I appreciated the word elderly. She told me that was the least important part of what she had just said. She was right. Frank Cole. I learned through the chain of information that Diane had assembled with the efficiency of a woman who has lived in the same neighborhood for 22 years and knows exactly how news moves through it, had confronted Ryan on Tuesday evening. Ryan had attempted 3 different explanations in the space of one conversation, each one contradicting the previous, which is the particular pattern of a man who is making his story up as he goes and has not had time to make it consistent. Frank had listened to all 3 explanations and then told Ryan in the direct language of a man who had spent 30 years in commercial real estate and understood contracts and representations and the cost of misrepresentation, that the conversation about the mortgage co-signature was over, the house, the wraparound porch, the 2-car garage in a good school district that Emily had described to me in March, with the particular brightness of someone who had already decided they deserved it. Ryan had told his parents he had a co-signer lined up, someone with clean credit and solid books, his exact words, according to what Frank told Ted, who told Diane, and that the loan was essentially approved, pending that signature. The co-signer had been me, past tense. Frank had also separately, and on his own initiative, called the catering company whose final invoice had not been paid. The catering company had told him politely and professionally that the outstanding balance was owed by Emily Bennett and Ryan Cole, that the signatory on the original contract was a Mr. George Bennett, and that they had received an email earlier in the week from Mr. George Bennett declining to cover the remaining amount. Frank had then called his son and asked him for the 4th time in 2 days to explain the $22,000. Ryan's fourth explanation was apparently worse than the first three. Sandra called me Wednesday afternoon. Her voice had completed whatever transition it had begun during our call on Tuesday. There was nothing tentative in it, now nothing carefully measured. She was clear and direct in the way of a woman who has made up her mind and is acting from that decision rather than toward it. "George," she said, "I want to apologize to you on behalf of my family. What Ryan did in that parking lot was wrong in every possible way. Frank and I have told him this. We have also told him that we will not be providing any financial assistance going forward until he demonstrates that he understands what he did and why it was wrong, which, based on the last 2 days of conversations, I am not optimistic about in the short term." A breath. "I am sorry. I am sorry for what happened to you at that wedding, and I am sorry it took seeing a video for us to understand what kind of person our son has been presenting himself as." I thanked her. I meant it without reservation. "One more thing," Sandra said. "Frank wanted me to ask the $22,000. He wants to know if there is anything that can be done. He is not saying Ryan will pay it back. He is saying Frank is willing to have that conversation." I told her I appreciated that, and I would think about it. I had no intention of pursuing it. The money was gone in the way that all spent money is gone, and spending energy chasing it would cost me something I valued more than $22,000. But I did not say that to Sandra because she had come to me with decency, and decency deserved a considered response rather than a flat refusal. After the call, I sat for a while in the shop's back office with the afternoon light coming through the single window that faces the parking lot. The lot was empty at that hour except for Marcus's truck and my own. Ordinary things. A cracked line in the asphalt that I had been meaning to have filled for 2 years. A bird on the fence at the far end that appeared to be conducting a detailed assessment of the gravel. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Emily, and one from a number I did not recognize that turned out, when I listened to the voicemail, to be Ryan. His message was 40 seconds long, salesman-voiced, and carefully paced, and it used the word misunderstanding 4 times. I deleted it without finishing it. Emily's voicemails were different. The first one from Tuesday was short and tight and asked me to call her back because there were outstanding invoices that needed to be addressed. The second one from Wednesday morning was longer and quieter and did not mention invoices at all. It started with my name and then paused for a moment, and in that pause I could hear her breathing and the specific quality of a silence that is not empty but full of something that has not yet found its shape in words. She did not leave a message after the pause. She just ended the call. I listened to the silence at the end of that voicemail twice. Then I set the phone down and went back to work. 4 days after the wedding, at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, Ryan Cole's truck pulled into my parking lot. Ryan had dressed for the visit. Not the wedding day suit, but close-pressed slacks, a collared shirt, the kind of careful presentation that says I am taking this seriously, without quite admitting that I am nervous. He came through the shop door at 2:03, nodded at Marcus behind the workbench, and asked if I had a few minutes. I told him to come to the back office. I did not offer coffee. He sat in the customer chair across from my desk and spent 90 seconds on what I can only describe as a prepared apology, structured paced, hitting the expected notes of regret and context and momentary loss of judgment. He said the word stress 4 times. He said he had not been himself. When he finished, I waited a moment to make sure he was finished. "All right," I said. "What do you need, Ryan?" The prepared version of him relaxed slightly, which told me the apology had been the preamble, and this was the actual meeting. "The 60,000, he said. "We need it. The house deposit deadline is in 3 weeks, and without that money we lose the 2,000. We already put down, and she is really struggling, George. She needs stability right now. You know how much she needs that. He had deployed Emily's name the way a man plays a card he has been holding since he sat down. I opened the folder on my desk. Bank statements going back 8 months. The brokerage account printout a contact of mine had helped me understand the pattern of withdrawals that did not match any version of Ryan's stated income or expenses. Ryan, I said, you have lost $34,000 in online sports wagering accounts over the past 14 months. I have the statements. The $60,000 was never going to buy a house. It was going to cover what you owe to people who are not patient about being owed money. The salesman left his face completely. That money is not coming, I said. Not 60,000, not 600. We are done with that conversation permanently. He stared at me. Then he leaned forward, and the voice that came out was the one from the parking lot, stripped and hard. Emily will never forgive you for this. I looked at him across my father's old desk in the shop I had built with 30 years of honest work, and I felt nothing that resembled fear. Emily, I said, is my daughter. You are a man who knocked me down in a parking lot and stepped on my jacket. There is a difference between those two things, and I think you have always known it. He stood up. He did not shake my hand. He walked through the shop without looking at Marcus and got into his truck and drove out of the lot faster than the cracked asphalt warranted. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He coming back? He said. No, I said. Marcus considered this. Good, he said, and went back to work. I came home on a Friday evening to find my front door unlocked. I had not left it that way. Emily was sitting at my kitchen table with the green ledger open in front of her. She had come looking for evidence that her father was a controlling man who used money as a weapon. That was the story Ryan had been building, and she had come to find the materials to support it. Instead, she had found 11 pages of handwriting that told a different story entirely. She looked up when I came through the door. Her eyes were red and swollen in the specific way of someone who has been crying alone for long enough that the crying has moved past the acute stage into something quieter and more exhausted. The ledger was open to the May 2022 entry. Fixed pipe closet fan drywall moved boxes. No charge. You never wrote loan anywhere, she said. Her voice was raw at the edges. It wasn't a loan, I said. She pressed both hands flat on the open pages. Her wedding ring caught the kitchen light. Ryan told me you kept score, she said. He said you recorded everything so you could hold it over us. She looked at the pages under her hands. But you didn't. You just wrote it down. I'm an accountant's son, I said. We write things down. Emily's face broke open the way faces do when the last available defense has been removed. She bent forward over the ledger and cried, with her whole body, shoulders shaking, breath catching, the kind of crying that has nothing performative in it, because there is no audience left to perform for. I sat down across from her. I did not reach for her. I let her cry. When she came up for air, she looked at me across my father's old kitchen table. I told you that you refused to sit with us, she said. At the reception. I said that to your face. Because of him. I know, I said. I'm so sorry, Dad. 3 weeks later, Sandra Cole came to the shop. She stood in front of my desk and said simply, I don't know when my son became this person. I'm sorry, George. Then she left. The Tuesday she came, I had been at the shop since 7 in the morning, working on a subfloor repair for a client in Arcadia, whose kitchen had been soft in the middle for 2 years, before they finally called someone. It was the kind of job I have always liked best: straightforward damage, honest materials, a clear path from broken to fixed. I was at my desk reviewing the materials invoice when I heard the bell on the front door. I knew it was Emily before I looked up. I cannot explain that with any precision. After 32 years, a father knows the particular weight of his child's footsteps, the specific hesitation in the way she crosses a threshold when she is not sure of her welcome. I had heard that hesitation the first time she came home after a bad grade in high school. I heard it now. She was alone. No Ryan in the parking lot, engine running, waiting to see which way things went. No phone in her hand, no prepared speech visible in her posture. Just my daughter, in a cardigan and flat shoes, holding a plain white envelope, standing in the doorway of the shop the way she used to stand in the doorway of the kitchen when she was 9 years old, and had something to tell me that she did not know how to begin. Marcus looked up from the workbench, read the room in approximately 1 second, picked up his coffee, and went to the back of the shop. That is the particular grace of a man who has worked beside you long enough to understand which moments belong to other people. Emily sat down in the chair across my desk. The real chair. The one I keep for clients, padded with armrests, the chair of a person who belongs in the room. Not a folding one. I noticed that she noticed. She set the envelope on the desk between us and pushed it across with 2 fingers, the way you slide something across a surface when you are not entirely sure it will be received. I opened it. Inside was a personal check for $400 written in her handwriting, the handwriting that looks like Margaret's when she is being careful and like mine when she is in a hurry. The amount line said $400.00. The memo line said Dad's jacket, one of many. Behind the check, folded into quarters and soft at every crease from being handled many times, was a single printed page. I recognized it before I unfolded it. The revision log from Jennifer at Magnolia Grand. Final revision, September 8th, 4:47 in the afternoon, requested by emily.bennettbride@gmail.com. Emily had been carrying it since I gave it to her in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. She had folded it and unfolded it enough times that the paper had gone soft at the intersections, the way paper goes when it has been a companion to a decision that took a long time to make. She waited while I looked at both things. She did not fill the silence with explanation or preemptive defense. She let me look. "I know what I did," she said when I set the papers down. Her voice was steady in the particular way that steadiness costs something. "Not what Ryan did. What I did. I moved your chair, Dad. I sat down at my computer 6 days before my wedding, and I wrote an email that put my father next to a bathroom door, and I did it because I was ashamed of where you came from and afraid of what Ryan's friends would think, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." The shop was quiet around us. Outside, a car moved slowly down Garfield Avenue. The bell above the door was still. "He told me what to think about you," she continued. "For 2 years, he fed me a version of you, the controlling father, the man who gives money to keep power over people. And I chose to believe it because it was easier than admitting what I was doing to you. I chose his version of you over the man who fixed my car and paid my rent and carried boxes in someone else's storage unit and never once asked me to say thank you." Her voice broke on the last 3 words, cracked clean through, and she pressed her lips together and waited until she had it back. "I said to your face that you refused to sit with us. I said that because Ryan told me to believe it, and I believed it because I wanted to." She did not cry. She had done her crying somewhere else in private, which told me she had thought carefully about this conversation and decided it was not the place for it. That restraint, that preparation, that was Margaret in her. Margaret always cried before the hard conversations, never during. "I'm not asking you to say it's fine," Emily said. "I know it's not fine. I'm not asking for the $60,000. I'm not asking you to fix anything." She looked at me across the desk with her mother's dark eyes. I'm asking if there's still a door I can knock on. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Margaret's letter folded in the back of the green ledger on the corner of my desk. Be the door she has to knock on. Margaret had written that in a hospital admissions lounge with a ballpoint pen, knowing she would not be there to say it a second time. Knowing her husband and her daughter would eventually need to find their way back to each other across whatever damage the years between them had accumulated. She had prepared for this moment, the way she prepared for everything carefully in advance, with more faith in both of us than either of us had earned at the time. I picked up the check. $400. One of many she had written, which meant she understood the arithmetic and was not pretending otherwise. She was not offering a settlement. She was offering a beginning. We forgive in installments around here, I said. Something moved through her face. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than relief and more durable. She almost smiled. It reached her eyes, which was the part that mattered, the part that told me the smile was not a performance. She stayed for 40 minutes. We talked about her apartment, small. She said 1 bedroom, a parking spot that required a 3-point turn rent. She was covering herself for the first time in 4 years. She talked about her job, a promotion she had applied for in August and was waiting to hear back on. She talked about Ryan in 3 sentences, flat and factual, the way you talk about a chapter that is over. She did not ask me what I thought. She did not need to. When she left, she stopped at the door and looked back at the shop the way she used to look at it when she was small, taking in the whole of it. The sign with the uneven letters on the right side, the bell, the workbench where Marcus had reappeared and was moving with his usual unhurried competence, the framed contractor's license on the wall, the 31 years of accumulated evidence that her father had built something real with his hands, and his patience and his willingness to show up. I'm proud of this place, she said. I should have said that a long time ago. I used the $60,000 the way Margaret would have approved of. I renovated the shop floor, new subfloor, new lighting, the kind of improvements I had been deferring for 6 years, because there was always somewhere else the money needed to go. I gave Marcus the largest bonus of his 18 years, which made him uncomfortable and grateful in equal measure, which is exactly the right reaction to a significant bonus. I hired a part-time manager, a young woman named Patricia, who had been running her family's hardware store since she was 20 and knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. And I booked 2 seats on a train through the Canadian Rockies, the trip Margaret and I had looked at every September for 15 years and always deferred for one practical reason or another. I went alone. I took a photograph of the mountains from the observation car that I printed and put in the cedar box beside the tissue paper where her wedding jacket used to be. It was not the same as going together. Nothing is the same as going together. But it was the trip, and it was real, and it was mine to have taken. Emily moved into her apartment on a Saturday in October. She pays her own bills now. Some months are harder than others. All of them are hers, which means all of them are building something she will actually be able to stand on. I opened the green ledger one final time on a quiet evening in September of 2024, turned past 11 pages of other people's emergencies and 4 years of a love that had needed to learn its own limits, and wrote on the last clean page in my best handwriting, Bennett family account, closed September 2024. Paid in full. My own seat. I closed the cover. The sound it made was a small, clean click in a quiet room, the sound of a door that has been properly hung and closes the way it is supposed to. Marcus appeared in the doorway the next morning with his coffee and his usual economy of expression. Mrs. Kowalski's porch railing needs fixing, he said. I picked up my toolbox. I walked out into a September morning in the San Gabriel Valley, the air clear and warm, the mountains sharp against the sky, the bell on the shop door sounding once behind me as it swung shut. I went to fix something for myself for once. I am 67 years old, and I spent 4 years confusing generosity with permission. I kept funding a life that was being built on top of mine, and I told myself it was love. Some of it was. But love without limits is not love. It is just an open account that someone else controls. If I could say one thing to any father watching this, it would be simple. Do not wait for a folding chair to tell you what the ledger already knows. I believe God puts people in our lives to teach us things we are too stubborn to learn on our own. My teacher was a letter in the back of an old notebook written by a woman who knew me better than I knew myself. This has been one man's family story. Not a perfect one. Not a proud one in every chapter. But an honest one. If these grandpa stories speak to something you have carried, leave a comment below. Tell me your folding chair moment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if grandpa stories like this one are worth your time, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Every family story deserves to be told. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than I can say. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted to carry real human truth. If that is not the content you are looking for, I respect that completely. Choose what serves you best.